Created with free version for non-commercial use.
Hello guys and girls, and welcome back to another episode of Quick Tips. So in this episode we're going to be talking about arcs and what they actually really mean and why they're important. So let's begin. So firstly, I want to start off with Euro Aussie, and we're going to be going through a few examples. So firstly, we need to understand what the importance is of an arc and what it actually means. Because the question I often get asked a lot is, what is the difference between an arc and a double top? And that's a really great question. So let's take a look on the 1 hour. Now, quite often when we're looking for a double top, we're looking for something like this. We see a move like this, for example, a move down, and then naturally within any kind of area, we're looking for that double top for a rejection to the downside. So naturally we'll have something like this. Now with the double top, it's normally very clear, very obvious, and quite picture perfect at times, where it literally rejects that type of resistance area within the double top. So when we're looking at something like that, sometimes people get caught on the wrong side of it, where in which that it will go a little bit higher than the left side, and people will rule the double top out and say, okay, well, the double top's invalid now, it's gone a little bit higher. This is where the psychology of the arcs come in. Now, the arcs are essentially going a little bit higher sometimes and getting people caught on the wrong side of the double top. So where people would think, let's say, double top is over, what we would do is see that, hold on a minute, what is the nature of the market telling us? And does it have any arcing nature? So what we mean by that, we'll get some corrective nature moving up normally with the arcs, and sometimes they can go a little bit higher and then still drop. This is where people will rule out the trade, where we will capitalize. So it's all to do with the psychology of getting people caught on the wrong side of the pattern of the double top. That's where the arcing nature comes in, and it's a huge benefit. So now let's take a look at that on a couple of examples so you can see. Now, I don't want to always show picture perfect ones. I want to show ones in a real life type environment in which that we see, so you can make sense of it, because it's not always picture perfect. So let's take a look. Well, if we take a look at Euro Aussie here, you can see that we have this arcing type nature here. Now, if we take this back to around this area here, we would be looking naturally within this pattern. We wouldn't have this trend line in, but we would be looking at the pattern here to see, is there a potential for us to get this arcing style nature within this pattern or a double top? So we'll have our double top as our override like this. And then what we would have is this moving up. So naturally in the real conditions, can you see how that impulsive candle there would normally get people a little bit put off? Because you would think that double top's invalid now. We've impulsively moved up. Let's go tick by tick. A little bit more. And then we start to create this arcing nature. So notice how we have this kind of corrective nature on the way up. And this is where people get confused, especially if they're not trading patterns. We can see that this is just part of the pattern. But firstly, you need to understand what everybody else is thinking to then capitalize. As it moves further, you can see this moves down, and we'll be setting the entry on the clear break. Purely because we have 1, 2, 3, we can see that's the clear trend line. We have the arcing nature. It just goes slightly higher than the double top. It's still intact within the pattern. And then we set an entry here to the downside. On this particular one, you would have probably got taken out for a break even. You may have stayed in it. It would have been one of those ones with your entry. So for those of you that got in around here, you may have just been tagged out from the spread, and some of you may have stayed in by about 3 or 4 pips. So I wanted to give more of an example of what actually happens. And it would have been one of those ones. I know quite a lot of people actually took this and done well with this trade. And it's all to do with the fact that we have the impulse, the continuation, we have the double top type formation, but then we have the arcing nature that goes a bit higher than the double top. That's the difference between just a typical double top and an arc. So that's how simple you need to keep it. And it's of a real benefit because it's the psychology behind it. So that's Euro Aussie. And I want to take you through a couple of more examples. So this one's slightly different on Aussie dollar. Let's take a look at it. So when we're looking at this particular pattern here, we're seeing this ascending type formation, anticipating that we may get some sell setups. So let's take a look on the 1 hour chart. So with this 1 hour chart, this type of formation, we have to think about what would be going through our heads at the time. So let's take this back. So when we're looking at it from this perspective, we would have had this trend line here connecting this one here. We can see we're just getting a rejection. It's ambitious, but we're seeing what kind of formation could we form. Now, as we play that a little bit more, we can start to see we get this formation. Naturally, it could be the start of a ascending like this, where we would look for some sell setups, or a double top, any kind of arcing nature. And as we speed that up, we can see we get this type of formation. So we're getting near the double top. So naturally, we would say, right, we will either get a touch of the 1, 2, 3, or we'll have the override here where it doesn't need to make it. That's what we need to realize. We don't need to get to the outer structure. So then naturally, we would see, is there any kind of rejection? This would be your typical double top. This type of arcing nature is slightly different, in which it extends a bit further and develops into a slightly bigger pattern. So let's take a look at that. So as we move up, we're now looking at, well, this is a potential rejection within this area. It moves higher than the double top. So you can see it's got that arcing style nature to it as it arcs around. And with the arcing nature, the key thing to look out for is that it's normally quite corrective. So it's never really, remember with the double top, you can have this corrective nature. It can impulsively move to the double top and then just can completely retrace. That's more like a double top, where with the arcing nature, it's a little bit less momentum. Not always, but the majority of the time, 80-20 rule. So as this develops, it moves down a little bit and it trickles its way up where you start to create this. Now, this is the key variable. When you're looking at something like this arcing nature where it breaks the double top, the majority of the time, these can develop into a deeper ascending channel before the drop. So that's the key tip there to write down, to make sure that when you see something like this, you know the potential is that this actually may just develop into an ascending channel. The analysis is still there, it just may take a little bit longer. And as we create this arcing style nature into an ascending channel, this is a real life condition, what we would look at. And as you can see there, typical retrace type formation. When we're looking at this area here, that retrace, enter in on this particular trade as we speed that up. And that one, this one would have actually definitely been a break even if you used the break even method, because at this point, taking the trade on the break, you would have had your stop above here for about 20 pips. And at this point, you would have gotten about 1% of profit. It would have been one of those ones that if you did decide to not move it to break even at that point, and as it retraced, you may have stayed in the trade or you may have taken the break even. Both are fine. And as you can see, we definitely are in the corrective phase as how deep we've been pulling back. So when we play that one quicker, it does play out. It's not the cleanest trade in the world, but as you can see that it does have that overall nature, especially with that wick, if you would have not locked in enough profits. But when you're looking at that type of formation, you need to realize that the arcing nature isn't just something that just goes beyond a tiny little double top. It's the whole concept of how it arcs round and what potentially could happen next. So keep it simple. That is Aussie dollar. Let's take a look at the next example. Now let's take a look at euro pounds. So this is a really great example. What we're looking at here is this particular pattern. So you can see that we have our 1, 2, expecting that third touch here. And you can see this overall ascending channel. So naturally, let's take a look on the 1 hour where we would look for entry and where the arcing nature is important and what that looks like. So if we take that back and you imagine at this point, what would we be expecting? You would have your trend line extended like this, and any kind of formation around this area, you'd be looking for that sell setup to the downside naturally. So as we speed that up, we move that to the upside. You'd also have the double top. You'd have this here like this. You'd be expecting to see if there's any kind of formation that you can take there. As you speed up, you break through. It's at this point here. We've got our third touch essentially now. 1, 2, third touch. Let's zoom in a little bit. So as you see that now, we're expecting any kind of retrace. You may have already taken that as an inside bar, but in taking these type of setups, there's a few ways to take them. Now, if this speeds up just a little bit so you can see, it's at this point where we're looking at here. Now it's the little mini double top. Remember, we'd be looking for, right, we've got the third touch. We'll be looking for that little double top within the pattern for the drop to the downside. Now, when we're looking to take those trades, we need to realize that even though we have 1, 2, 3, the arcing nature suggests that if it goes a little bit higher, it doesn't necessarily mean that the trade is off. It still means that the trade can be valid depending on the nature of what we get. So if we speed that up, so it's at this point here where people would get very confused. It's broken to the upside. They would think that maybe it's going to the upside now. It's broken the double top, as you can see, the arcing nature, corrective nature on the way up. But what we do have here is the key components. We can now put in our trend line like this and see that we have just broken the double top. But how did we break the top? With the arcing nature. As it arcs round like this, we get the rejection, and then what we also get is the retrace candle here. This is the key component, like we saw in the other quick tip, of how you can use all of these components together with the double top, with the arcing nature and the retrace for the entry. So when looking at that, we set our entry below, and then we're triggered in as we get triggered in here. So for a couple of hours, and then we break to the downside impulsively. And it goes on to become a pretty decent trade to the downside as we hit target in this area here. But overall, it showcases that when you're looking at this kind of formation, it's important to understand that yes, that's the third touch, but don't rule it out if it just goes a little bit higher, because what happens is that just evolves. We can see that evolves, and what is actually happening is this is just an ascending type formation on the wick. There's the retrace, and there's the arcing nature, getting people caught on the wrong side of the pattern. And that is the key variable there. It's giving you an edge within the market that when people are thinking, right, something's changed, we're anticipating nothing's changed, we've got the arcing nature. So that's your contingency plan. And it seems so simple, and it's a question that I get asked a lot, so it's definitely something I wanted to cover. As you can see the power of it, that even when you're looking at something absolute in terms of, well, if we neaten that trend line up, essentially 1, 2, 3, that goes above, it breaks back down, there's been no progression, so we evolve that, and that's the true structure. You can see we have 1, 2, 3 significant areas. Even though that one doesn't touch, you can see we have the 1, 2, 3. It's not always about at that point that it touches now, but you can see that type of formation. So I hope that helps, guys and girls, with the different variations. As you can see, that one was pretty picture perfect, really, really nice setup. The other one on Aussie dollar extended a little bit more, different type of environment. And on Euro Aussie, that was within a continuation pattern as well. So some of them are going to be really clear, and some of them you have to know when to read between the lines. So I hope that helps for that quick tip, guys and girls, and implementing the ARCs into your trading is going to be super beneficial. And what I highly recommend is that you go through the charts and you mark on these arcs. Go through multiple examples and even make a folder of arcing nature, or call it arcs, and then plot them on, find examples and see how they behave. You're going to see that not every single one is exactly the same. And this is where that area of discretion comes in, where you become a better trader, where you've got that information. You're just adding another layer. So when you are forecasting, you actually understand what the market's doing, rather than thinking, right, the double top's broken and then your analysis only goes that far. We have to think beyond that, where we can really capitalize and have that true edge in the market. So I hope you enjoyed that and took a lot of value from it, guys and girls. And then I will see you in the next episode.
Created with free version for non-commercial use.